Hey everybody, Card Dreamer here, coming at you on behalf of D Class and all things D Class related. And today I wanted to do a short discussion, but actually more just a telling, I suppose, of just how I got into gaming in general. I thought it'd be fun to take a look back where everything started from and reminisce about how we got here. And that would go, man, that goes back to the 80s. So my father had a video game console pre Nintendo called the Intellivision. And he used to play this, and so did my mother. They used to play it from time to time. And then eventually things happened, and my parents got divorced. My dad moved out, left, but he left the console behind. And I never forgot it. So I would actually play it. And because it was left hooked up. I don't recall ever asking like if it was okay to or not because I'm a kid, so we don't do that. But um I remember he used to have the games in a nice case, whatever, and I remember the controllers, and he didn't have a huge selection, but as a kid, to me it was a lot of games. Nowadays it's not even worth buying a console for, but um yeah, so it was a kind of a compact console, about the size, say, of the Xbox One, give or take. Actually, maybe more the depth of the one, but a little bit more the width of a PS2. But you guys can look it up. And it used to have two controllers with a joystick. They had number pads, and there would be each game came with a key overlay that you slid in over top of the keypad that let you know what buttons were doing what for that particular game. I thought, the system was neat at the time. I still have fond memories of it. And he had a few games. He had a couple of different Dungeons and Dragons game. One was first person. One was kind of, you saw the stick figure traversing an overworld map, and each level was kind of this yellow maze you explored. He had a fish game called Shark, and basically what you did is you started out this tiny little fish, and you would just eat small things until you grew big enough that you could actually take on sharks. And you just kept going until you died. And he had a medical one, and he had Donkey Kong, and so on. And he had a racing game and Pitfall, and yeah, he had a few games. But I remember one day just finally playing, and man, I had such a ball with some of those games. Donkey Kong, I definitely played for a good bit of. Racing game, eh. But the Shark was the one I think that stood out to me the most. I must have put quite a bit of time in there into that game. And I actually have the Intellivision collection on the GameCube, and I have that game. So maybe one day I'll just do a little tiny Let's Play, kind of as a complimentary video to this discussion. But I played that in the Dungeons and Dragons. That was kind of the maze looking one. I didn't care for the first person one, even though I did play it, but I didn't really care for it. I preferred that maze one, and I remember it was being tough as nails. It was so difficult, but there were so many neat things. Just exploring the map, the overworld map, and these different levels, and it was neat because if you got a bow and arrow, you could shoot, and your arrows would ricochet down the hall, bounce off wall, and then you could ricochet your shots to kill a monster or demon that was waiting for you. It was so neat, and it was cool because as you approach it, you would hear the monster growling a little louder and louder and faster, faster. I loved it. It was so good. But that system, because he left that behind, it got me into gaming. Watching him play and getting my own hands on it. I remember having friends over, we'd play it. Oh, it's just so many memories, and it's just fun to think back to simpler times of the game of gaming in general. Eventually, when I started visiting my father after the divorce, uh, I think it was back in '86 or '7. Nintendo came out with their home console, and of course, I was hooked. I would always play every time we went to Toys R Us or Kitty City, and I think it was Kitty City actually more here or more on my father's side because he moved back to where my grandmother lives, where I'm living now. Um, that neighborhood, and Kitty City was the big store, and it was literally like a 2 minute drive, like not even. It was like around the corner across the street. And I just remember every time going there, they're checking out the video game console, and they always had a or the video games, and they had one on display for play, and just being so hooked. And interesting enough, it wasn't even Super Mario that got me hooked on a Nintendo wanting to play it. It was the Ghostbusters game. I know that sounds so dumb, but because it's the original Ghostbuster games for NES is not a good game. It it's a classic in the sense that it's bad and some of the things it did, but it's a bad game. But as a kid, I remember watching the movie, and that was also due to my father. I know he had it, he liked it, he had it on tape. He had recorded it, I think, off like HBO or something back in the day. And I watched the heck out of that tape. I didn't get some of it because I was young. I really didn't get some of the jokes. Like but I remember quoting that movie all the time. I got heavy into the movie and the cartoon series when that came out and collected the toys. So when there was a Ghostbuster game, I wasn't thinking about good. Back then, you didn't know anything about good or bad games per se, because it was all like wild in your face. Like my only introduction to games prior was the Intellivision. That was only a handful of games. This was like just I mean, it really literally was a generation above it. It was just so far beyond what the Intellivision did. And I remember getting hooked, and I wanted it so bad. And he ended up buying one to keep down at his apartment when we visited. And it came with Mario. Didn't get Ghostbusters right away. Came with he got the big set. He got the one that was the 3-in-1 Mario, Super Mario Brothers, Duck Hunt, and World Class Track Meet. The first game that I can remember that you used a pad to play, floor pad. And it was an Olympic setting, and I played that. But Super Mario, man, that was my game. I loved it so much. I played the heck out of that. Duck Hunt was definitely fun too. I got a little more, I think, into the clay shooting. I don't know why, but I loved all of it. But yeah, man, I just think back, and I can even remember the first time finally beat Super Mario Brothers, and you could start again, and all the Goombas were replaced with the Buzzy Beetles, and making it just a little bit more difficult. Oh, man, memories. But yeah, I would love to hear what your guys, what got you into gaming. So for me, like I said, it was my dad and his television, or watching that and playing it for myself, and then Nintendo coming out and just blowing games out of the water. That, yeah, that system is what started the whole. Those two systems, each one was special for their own reason. Like in television, got me introed me to video games. Nintendo is what got me hooked on it as a lifelong passion. So they both deserve recognition. And it's just there's a whole nostalgia to games that isn't present anymore, and I miss the heck out of it. So we'll just make this whole actually a nostalgia, the early days of gaming nostalgia discussion, really. Um, but I mean, I remember games weren't even kept on store shelves. So it was when you went into Toys R Us and Kitty City and you went down toy aisles or the game aisle, it was sleeves. Like they had the whole wall with these pocket sleeves that had pictures on one side. They were laminated, actually, I think, too. And below them was a sleeve. But there was the picture of the game cover on the front, and you would have to flip it up to see the back of the what the back of the game case would look like. And you got to read it, and you just saw little pictures because all these titles obviously weren't on display. You were lucky you had a system out there with one game in there to try, and man, it was fun. Just and it looked immense. Like back then as a kid, like it's nothing because it's one video game console. You didn't have competing consoles. It was just Nintendo. And I remember you went in and all these games, and you don't know, you don't have a concept. There was no internet. It was all new, so you didn't even have per se word of mouth until it's out for a little bit. But man, a game come out, all you have is these pictures, and you're just like, "What is this new adventure? Oh my gosh, what is this game? Wow, this still picture looks good." Like I mean, by still picture, I mean the little pictures on the back of the game case. It's not moving, and you don't get to see anything about the game. Most games didn't have TV commercials. It was just Nintendo was advertising the product, and maybe a Zelda or a Mario, but until Nintendo really took off in a year or so. But I mean, like it's a whole different ball game. I mean, now you got your Game Stops, which suck, but I say that, but I never had a problem with GameStop in store. I only ever had a problem with the online, but we've already had that discussion. Um, yeah, it's you got GameStop, you got Walmart, and it's just not the same. You have their glass display cases with some of the games, but it's not the same. It doesn't even take up. I feel like you can go into a Target or Walmart, and even though they sell the hottest or quote unquote the newest games, but that's just it. It's just the newer games, so to speak, and they have to compensate for three consoles: Nintendo, PlayStation, and Xbox. And I feel like the whole section combined doesn't take up what the wall and aisle used to take up just for the NES back in the day, back when it was new. Of course, I was a kid, I was smaller, younger, and everything looked bigger. So don't get me wrong, like, nostalgia can play that trick on your mind, but there was just a sense of grandness to it back then that isn't there now. GameStop isn't now, even GameStop now, especially with the whole pandemic, it's not what it used to be. Even before the pandemic, it would only looked bigger because half the Xbox section, well, each section, whether it was Xbox, Nintendo, PlayStation, they're divided in half between new and pre-owned, and so it's not. It's misleading, You're looking at kind of double the games. You're looking at the same game, only one's owned and one isn't. But man, before GameStop though, you had Electronic Boutique. At least here in the States, I think Electronic Boutique still exists in other places like Canada and such. But man, I remember going to those stores, and then there wasn't just the Nintendo or Nintendo console. You had PC. Of course, we're getting into Super Nintendo era, sort of. But I mean, it was pre-Windows. It was like DOS or Windows 3.1. It's pre-Windows what we know it today. And man, the big box computer game, even that was great. And it was something about just seeing all these things, and you still had to use your imagination based on just those couple of images on the back of a box were. So it just blew my mind. Like, just a different time of game shopping in general, where things still were had a magic to them, and it was so incredible. And I miss doing that. I miss being able to go to a store, even KB Toys in a mall. I don't know if anybody remembers the KB Toys. I don't know if there's any still around, to be honest. They kept their games behind the register, so you had to look at the wall and see what they had, ask to see it. Oh my man! And the highlight as a kid too, back in that day, was to actually go to the video game aisle, and whether you were going to get a video game or not, it didn't even matter. The goal was to go and play whatever game was on display at the time. It didn't even matter. And what's so interesting about that is it literally did not matter what game was in that console. It could be one that is known and reputed for being a crap game nowadays, but it just didn't matter because as a kid you were just excited to play a game. So it could be a horrible game, but you played it and you had fun. So I think that was interesting because you didn't own it, because it was on display, because you didn't get to play many games as back in my generation as a kid. It didn't matter. Like good, bad games didn't matter until you got it home. I think it's interesting you enjoyed it more when you did own it. It's funny to me to think about that, but I thought that it's something that jumps out at me. But yeah, and even when I had the original Nintendo, eventually I got one when because I was living with my mother and visit my father. Eventually we got one where my mother with my mother as well. And even then, I still went back once in a while to the added television because Nintendo didn't match the games that were on there. Obviously, Donkey Kong is the only one I can even think of that they did. But yeah, and I remember the early games that I got for Nintendo, besides the one that came with the Nintendo, was Ghostbusters, Ninja Turtles. In fact, that may have been. I can't remember what came first, whether it was Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles or Ghostbusters. I think it was Ghostbusters. In fact, I'm like 90%, 99% sure it was Ghostbusters. But man, no concept of what was good or bad. Just enjoyed it because you enjoyed it more just because it was the franchise, right? You didn't think about whether, man, this is a crappy game. You just enjoyed it for the franchise. And of course, my collection grew over time, but it grew slowly. As you're a kid, you didn't really have a huge library. If you had 10 games, you were freaking lucky. Honestly, you were freaking lucky because I it took a long time to get that many games for me. I probably do have that much, but I probably have a couple more. But I mean, that is the entire lifespan of the NES, so which was years though. I mean, if you had that within the first year or so, like yeah, I kudos to you, man. You had it lucky. I couldn't, and there was no way I wasn't able to. Of course, nowadays it's like you got a few hundred games per console almost. You know, it's times have changed so much with gamings, and sometimes I wonder if we really should be slowing down instead of all the excess. We're inundated with all these things. Honestly, we're inundated with it nonstop, feeling like we have to jump on the latest games that are coming out, whether they're indie, AAA, doesn't matter. We feel so inundated and so like in the need now to get. Oh my gosh, this is coming out. We got to get. I want to beat this. We got to do this. And actually, it's funny because Dace and I did the whole backlog discussion, and it kind of plays into that kind of what we were talking about there too, was this need to play the current game and to keep up. And that wasn't really quite the issue back then. You replayed the few games you had over and over and over again, and you got your money's worth. And nowadays, not and it's not even one console. Nowadays, it's I don't know. I mean, some people have one. A lot of people still have one console per se. There's a crap ton more coming out for them though than there were back then, and a lot of people have multiple consoles or a PC to play on. So I mean, it's just the the possibilities multiply exponentially when it comes to the number of games you can play and own. It's incredible and overwhelming, and certainly has affected me. But I think back, I miss those simpler times. And I don't know. Some of you may not have been around for those times. This is the day and age you've grown up with, and this is just all you knew. And I get that. And it. There's just nostalgia all along the way. I think about when Super Nintendo was out, and then Sega Genesis started, and that was your first real idea and notion of a console war. And man, now it's just growing three ways between Nintendo and Xbox and PlayStation, and who won E3 and who did that. And gaming is just not what it is. It used to be about you just had a game console, you enjoyed a game. Nowadays, whew. But yeah, this isn't a long discussion. I just thought it'd be fun to kind of just take a trip back and let you guys know really when it got me into it. And that was that Intellivision uh, game console, and the memories of just playing those games and what started a love, and Nintendo for sealing the deal, so to speak, with it when it came to Zelda and Mario. And Nintendo did went a step further, because they were a toy company first, and they made toys based on their games. And seeing those early toys and little dioramas that you can get, or statuettes or whatever back then, man, that had me so hooked too. It was so neat, the concept of having toys based on the video games, because there were nothing you wouldn't do that. You couldn't do that with Atari or Intellivision or ColecoVision or any of those, because they were like tiny little pixel stick people. I mean, what are you gonna play with, right? So, but now you had Mario and you had Link, and it was just wow. Now it's like, every collector's edition comes with a statue, and now video game figures are 20, 30, 40 freaking dollars a piece. There's a discussion for you. It's yeah, times have changed, and I don't even know what to think about it, cuz I think partly my generation, the hardcore ones really kind of took with it, ran with it, and now we're getting butthurt with it. I mean, just price gouging, the memorabilia, and the collector's items. And it used to be you were excited, and back in those days too, games came with a manual, man, a manual. Can you believe it? They came with a manual that told you a story about the game, unless it was a sports game. What's there really to say? But showed you what buttons did what. I mean, extensive walkthrough now, mind you. Um, just even talk about different level and do this and you do this, and man, Zelda's. I remember the Legend of Zelda. Its game story was right there in the book, right there in the book. Nowadays, you buy a game and there's nothing. You might have a sleeve for a code for, a 10-day free trial of the Xbox Live. Nothing when it comes to Nintendo Switch or PS4 almost. It's crazy to think about the direction gaming has changed, but I'm still loving video games. I've actually branched out quite a bit from those days of what I liked or didn't like. I think I was really snooty kind of when it came to video games. back when I was a little kid because it was like you gotta go with the franchises, you know. Hey man, I want Ninja Turtles, I want Ghostbusters, I want Mario, I want Zelda. You know, you stuck with names that you knew as a kid because that's what drew you in. You didn't think about these other games like other games. It's hard to believe that it's what got the things that got popular from it. Final Fantasy and Dragon Warrior or Dragon Quest as it's known now mostly. Uh, Great games, but it's fun to think about like man, what got somebody hooked on that because it was an unknown thing back then. What did you look at that got you to go, I want to play Final Fantasy. Oh man, this is so much fun. I would love to hear stories from that. If there's anybody out there who's gone through that, who remembers growing up with the Nintendo and not hearing anything about these games, but going, "Oh my gosh, this looks so cool." Especially, that goes double for games like Mega Man because we all, it's kind of like the tradition now. Like Mega Man Special 1 and 2 had that horrible box art. Horrible, had nothing to do with the game. So it's like, how did you look past it? How did you look past that cover art and get to that glorious game? I would love to hear people's stories with this, man. But anyway, yeah, so we're going to wrap this up. It was a short one. I appreciate everybody's time. Thank you all for listening. I'm Card Dreamer. This has been D Class, and until next time, stay evil.